Okay, thank you very much, and welcome back everybody to the second half of our North Dorset Council Northern Area Planning Committee. We had a very interesting and busy morning, and we're looking forward to an equally busy and interesting afternoon. The first thing I have to do is take another quick roll call of the members present. So could I just, as I call your name, could you indicate if you're present or not? Councillor Tim Cook.
Present.
Councillor Les Fry.
Present.
Councillor Matt Hall.
Present.
Councillor Brian Heatley.
Present.
Councillor Carol Jones.
Present.
Councillor Stella Jones.
Present.
Councillor Mary Penfold.
Present.
Councillor Val Apothecary.
Present, John.
Councillor Belinda Rideout.
Present.
Thank you very much. And I forgot to introduce myself. I am, of course, Councillor Sherry Jesperson, and I'm chair of this committee. So we move on now to agenda item 5C, an application to erect 20 dwellings at Bourton Mill in Bourton near Gillingham. Now, members, this is a challenging site with a long and complex planning history. The 20 dwellings before us today are part of a wider scheme, some of which is already has permission and some of which is already underway. Although the planning and enforcement history of this site is relevant, I do think it's quite important that we need to stay focused on the application and the decision that's before us today and consider it in its own merit, as it were. Hannah Smith, the Senior Planning Officer, is going to take us through the planning complexities, and we also have Mark Hitchcock, who is acting head of enforcement, who's had a long and very proactive involvement with this site. And while Mark is not going to make a presentation to us, he's here to cover off all of the queries, any queries we might have about enforcement. And we also have, of course, Steve Savage from Highways, if we have questions for him. So without more ado, Hannah, would you like to introduce us to your report and this site? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just sharing my report, my presentation now.
It's on the screen. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you. So this application is for the erection of 20 dwellings. The application number is 2019-15-29. Just to give you some site context of where the application site lies within the North Dorset area, it's in the upper northern part of our authority area on the border here with the neighbouring authorities. In relation to the site itself, it's within the defined settlement boundary of Bourton. Bourton is one of the larger villages in the North Dorset Local Plan 2016. The site is contained within the limits of the settlement boundary, as you can see here. In terms of heritage, there's no direct heritage impacts. You can see the closest listed buildings are some distance away, and it isn't within the setting of any conservation area, so there's no real heritage issues with the site and its considerations. In terms of constraints within the site, a major constraint to note is the presence of the high-risk flood zone, which runs along the central section of the site. You can see the site location here, and most of the site's covered by the high risk of fluvial flooding from the River Stour. In terms of other constraints, you've got the AO&B, Cranbourne Chase and West Wiltshire Down AO&B boundary here. So the site does lie within the setting of the AO&B. However, there's no impact in terms of the setting of the designated landscape. The site's actually located in a bowl, and there's very little visibility between the site and the AO&B due to the topography and also the extent of vegetation on the higher ground here, which you'll see from the photographs later on. In terms of footpaths, there are some footpaths in the locality that run around the site, but none through the site itself, although there are public views of the site from the road. So I just put this location plan here to show you where the red line of the site is. So you can see that the wider site is larger. You can see the ownership here. This blue line is slightly different from the very original application because some of the areas have been sold. Obviously, they're not in the original ownership anymore because there is some development along here on Bridge Street of 2 dwellings, which I'll show you in a minute again, which has been constructed, and some other dwellings that, in this zone here that have been also constructed and are occupied, and also over here, but I'll show you that in a minute. So this application relates to this red line area here. And it's to erect 20 dwellings, but in terms of quantum of development, this application would only result in additional 4 dwellings to the total of 35, which were originally consented. So I just wanted to talk briefly about the history of the site. It's been obviously historically a mill site for considerable length of time and has gone through many different industrial uses on the site. Including bomb making during the war, significant industrial activities there. So the site had significant decline in more recent years. There was not much to salvage from the buildings here, unfortunately, because of a lot of modern type development, and also a significant amount of asbestos all through the site, on the piping and throughout the buildings, which was, typical of developments of this time, but it was causing a significant environmental issue to the wider area through asbestos seeping from the site through nesting birds and other activities, and also people and young people getting into the site and causing risk to themselves potentially. It was also very visually detracting back then. So the site today, it's another site. This is actually not the site today. This is some more shots of the site how it was. So you can see there was lots of tanks that needed to be removed, lots of buildings that were clad, and you can see some historic type buildings here, which weren't retained apart from some of the chimney stack, but they had all fallen into quite a state of disrepair. So moving on to the site today. Some of the site has been built out already. So this is Bridge Street as you come off of the main street through Bolton. These 2 dwellings have been constructed and are occupied, which are sort of separate from the main site. You can see the use of green sandstone facing, which has been used throughout the site, traditional type materials, and salvage green sandstone from the mill on the retaining walls. You can see here that obviously for flood purposes, the dwellings are raised so that they aren't at risk of flooding to the acceptable level here. This is as you go into the site along the State Road, and you can see these dwellings here also follow a similar type of design. This is looking back towards the site entrance here. You can see there's a mixture of green sandstone render, tiled and slate roofs. You can see this area here. I'll just point this out now on this photograph. This is the spore heap, which is referred to, which is a mound of soil from around the site. And this would be reused with re-levelling throughout the site, and it will be obviously made safe. So occupiers of the site would not come in contact with the soil that's to be reused through various mitigation measures. All of the dwellings have impermeable membranes within them to protect from hydrocarbons, gases, and in the garden areas there will be a cap, an impermeable membrane, and above that a clean layer of imported topsoil that doesn't come from the site, that has to be tested, so there'd be no risk of any contaminants coming in contact through any pathways once the dwellings are occupied. This is part of the application that's before members today. This block here has been revised from the previous consent, and I'll show you some elevations in a minute. This has already been constructed, but it's not occupied yet. So the proposal along here was slightly different in the previous approval. This application seeks to changed the level slightly. So you can see this is the front of the building, and you can see this other photograph here. This is actually the back of the building. They're split level buildings. There's no accommodation on the ground floor. This is garaging. And then you have the gardens at this high level. So you walk out of the lounge area onto the gardens that are at the same height as the first floor of the dwelling houses. This has a significant benefit over the consented scheme, which had large retaining walls. So you would have walked out at the ground level and then had significant retaining features at the back here, which was always a little bit of a concern in terms of amenity and usability of the gardens. So this has a significant benefit in terms of the use of levels. It does follow a slightly different character to the cottages that were approved, but it does reflect almost more of the industrial heritage of the site, with the window openings and the more simplified form, with little modern additions to add some interest along the front here. So this is the top end of the site where you've got the mill pond. It's very picturesque and it's very pretty up here. If you turn round, immediately looking back, turn your back to the mill pond, this is the view here. So the site had significant abnormal costs involved with it. The river Stour had to be relocated through the site. It used to run through the site, through the buildings in a very haphazard way. So this development actually rerouted the River Stour through this modern culvert, which has been designed to a high level of flood protection in accordance with what the Environment Agency required as well. So this modern culvert takes the water through the site and then it goes under the road and into a culvert at the far end. You can see part of the original mill building that has been retained just to have that historical reference there with the green sandstone chimney here. Other abnormal cost is obviously the contaminated land. That's cost significant amounts to mitigate through the site. And also there's been additional costs through the foundations having to be piled because of run-in sands under the site as well, which is an additional cost. Homes England have provided a developer loan for this scheme because of the severe viability issues with it. It's gone through a series of viability reviews previously, which found that affordable housing could not be supported on this site, unfortunately, because of the viability issues, and that was removed to the site, and it's still in a difficult position in terms of ongoing viability. This photo here it's not within the red line of the site, but just showing it for context. This is the open space, the flood attenuation basin. So it's a large area that's at a specific gradient to take excess water and act as a drainage basin, but also very, very natural in its appearance. It's actually an allocated site within the Bourton neighbourhood plan as a local green space, and this would be retained in its entirety. The Section 106 for this application follows the requirements of the site-wide scheme. So the requirement to offer this area to the parish council in the first instance and the relevant maintenance contributions and the provision of the LAP would still be retained in this application because there's overlap obviously with this application and the site-wide requirements and aspirations of the scheme. All of the other Section 106 contributions also remain the same from the original grant. This is a view of the spore heap looking down. So this is obviously piled up at the moment, but the idea would be to regrade this through the application site. There was originally intention to remove some of the soil from the site. The viability of the scheme doesn't allow for that cost. But the site can be made safe for human occupation through the mitigation, provided it's carried out in accordance with all the reports that are cited in the conditions in this report. So in terms of the original layout, this is how it was laid out originally. There were originally plans for the village hall to be on this site, but the community have found alternative sites through their neighbourhood plan. So this was removed, the on-site requirement was removed from this scheme. So this is just a large open space now rather than having any structures within it, which is quite nice within the setting of the really picturesque river corridor here. The area of the application that this application relates to is this area I've circled here. So it's these blocks here. So the proposed layout for this section of the site broadly follows the same approach. So these dwellings here are the same as what was originally consented. and this dwelling here is the same as what was originally consented. These runs here, so there's 4 additional dwellings. So 1 additional dwelling in this terrace here, an additional dwelling in this terrace here, 1 here and 1 in here. So basically we've got a very similar layout in terms of the site that was going to be developed, but some smaller units incorporated into the scheme, because the market evidence is that these dwellings have been selling better and there's more demand for them rather than the terrace larger properties. So it's to help with viability in some respects. So this is the proposed elevations. I've put on, these are the ones that I just showed the photographs of that have been constructed. This unit here, so this is 3 dwellings here. So it's just this section here that I showed the photographs on that have the split level gardens with the gardens at the rear. This is what the scheme looked like originally, so it's moved slightly away from this cottage appearance. But as you can see, the levels can be accommodated through the site without there being any adverse impact on neighbouring properties, because the distances between other dwellings are quite significant. It's the elevations of units 15 to 16. You can see again that they follow a similar design to the dwellings that I showed you that have been constructed. And this is what was originally consented here. It's more cottagey. This block is more similar, so it already had a larger scale here with rooms in the roof. And this again has been changed slightly to accommodate the additional dwelling with the split level arrangement so that the gardens are accessed from the first floor. And this is units 3 to 5. You can get an idea for the character. So it has moved slightly away from the original, but kept the same sort of theme running through the site. So the main planning issues are the location of the development. It's within the settlement boundary of one of the larger villages within the North Dorset area. It has a consent across the site for 35 dwellings, and this application seeks to increase that by 4. In terms of flooding, the flood mitigation measures that were contained within the previous scheme would be transferred onto this, and the flood, the levels of the dwellings would have to comply with the minimum floor levels that were specified at that in the original application. Contamination, that's been a real concern of the parish and other residents. I think it's reassuring that the conditions 12, 13 and 14, rather than seeking to require reports to be submitted for approval, they actually confirm the acceptance of the asbestos management plan and the materials management plan upfront. They have been reviewed and confirmed as being acceptable by the council's contaminated land consultant. So the applicant has to then, when building any further dwellings, adhere to those requirements. All of the dwellings that have been constructed and are now occupied have followed the mitigation and verification report process and have successfully dealt with issues of contamination. In terms of amenity, the site is well separated from surrounding residential properties, so there'd be no issue with overbearing. Some concern was raised about the scale of the new proposals, but as you can see, they fit into the street scene relatively well and wouldn't impact on the amenity of residents living within the development. And the highway impacts of the development can be made acceptable, following on from the highway comments that have been received. So moving to the recommendation, it's to grant, subject to conditions and the completion of a Section 106 agreement, to secure all of the obligations that were previously approved through the previous consent. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Hannah. Members will appreciate this has a degree of complexity in the history of this site. Steve Savage, is there something you would like to say on highways, if you're ready? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Well, there isn't much to say, Chair. The Western Access Road is going to remain private, obviously not being offered for public adoption, but it does have a turning head at the end, so it's suitable for large vehicles to turn. and I believe it gains access to the lake, which you saw in the photos. I think the other important point is that the level of car parking is deemed to be acceptable. Even though there are more units, they're smaller, so the car parking requirement per unit is less. So it balances itself out, if you like. So the Highway Authority's got no objection to this, Chair, but obviously if there are any questions, then I'm here to answer them.
Good, thank you very much indeed. Good. We have two submissions from the public and one from Bourton Parish Council now to hear. So Nicola, if you'd like to do your reading for us, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Mr. and Mrs. Hallett, objection. All points raised are referring to the document titled Design and Access Statement for Changes to the Layout, Houses and House Types, prepared by Ashley Design, October 2019. 1. We are aware that the original LBH Wembley contamination report showed considerable levels of contamination in the soil at the site. We are aware that no soil has left the site and that this contaminated soil has been incorporated into the soil heap on the northern site. If this soil is to be used to enhance levels within the northern area, point 3.7, what action has been taken or is proposed to either remove this soil or make it safe for domestic dwellings? 2. In point 3.1, it is stated that the design is aimed to reflect the original mill appearance. The photograph attached to this report clearly illustrates that the proposed buildings are far from representing the original ones in appearance, size, and indeed height. When this development was originally planned, there were designs shown to residents of what was to be built in our village. We were shown thatched roof buildings and greenstone face buildings, but so far we have buildings coated in yellow render, which has already had to be repainted due to severe discolouring. Bright red tiled roofs and with regard to use of green sandstone in construction, apart from the odd cornerstone and retaining wall, no house looks remotely like the originals. We would like to express concern to the height that the buildings are constructed, and in point 3.4 reference is made to that. Building forms remain, ridge heights, massing, expression and materials being retained as approved. This does not seem to be the case, and indeed 3.7 appears to contradict point 3.4, which states that enhancing levels within the northern area site will avoid removing material from the site whilst at the same time raising rear garden levels. The current spoil heap height must be in excess of 3 metres. Are we therefore to believe that garden and therefore corresponding property floor levels will be raised to this height? We would also like to ask why the site is to be raised to help the contractor use the contaminated spoil in the site rather than remove it as good practice would dictate. Number 3, increasing the property numbers whilst not increasing the bedroom capacity will indeed increase the number of numbered dwellings, therefore the number of vehicles in their movements. The next one is Louise Shepherd and Jeremy Watts, objection. I have monitored the site closely and am concerned with numerous inconsistencies in reports, especially reliance on unverified information provided by the developer and DC planners' acceptance of self-certification. The LBH Wembley remediation statement identified high levels of contamination. An FOI request advised no soil has left the site, yet recent testing declared no unsafe levels of contamination found. Where has the original contamination gone? It must be somewhere. The planning application proposes to reuse stockpiled soils known as the spoil heap. Do the planning committee members appreciate the volume of spoil heap? Estimated to be more than 30,000 cubic metres. How can this volume of soil be retained without raising the ground levels of dwellings? Para 3.4 and 3.7 of the Design and Access Statement are at odds. Para 3.7 indicates raising rear gardens only to avoid removing the soil heap from the site, but how can the volume of the soil heap raise rear gardens without raising the dwellings as detailed in 3.4? There is simply too much soil heap to distribute and would be impossible to do without raising the site levels. There are no cross-sectional drawings in the application containing street scenes which provide an indication of how the houses will appear visually from street level. The properties already built are significantly higher than expected because the original drawings did not demonstrate the height in relation to street level. Plots 25 and 26 currently under construction are built on top of a retaining wall over 10 feet high from street level. This is visually overbearing and not in keeping with the other properties in the village. This is contrary to Bolton Neighbourhood Plan Policy 3C. All alterations or new development shall complement the character and appearance of surrounding properties in terms of height, scale and density. This dominant feature is visually unattractive and imposing. I appreciate this has already had planning permission. My point is street views should be available for scrutiny to ensure the properties to which this application relates do not hold any surprises in terms of height in relation to street level. The original application proposed was for 16 times 4-bed houses, encouraging families into Bolton, using the local amenities and contributing to the community. The new application proposes to replace these with 10 times 2-bed and 10 times 3-bed. 2-bed houses would more likely attract buy-to-let buyers, not providing affordable homes but higher rentals. The number of vehicles will be increased with more properties and is likely to lead to congested parking. Okay, and Bolton Parish Council. Contrary to assertions that in the officer's report, Bolton Parish Council has repeatedly raised pertinent planning considerations and reiterates its objection to this application because A, the material submitted with the application is deficient for the following reasons. It fails to make clear that the application proposes the retention of the large stockpile of unregulated contaminated waste material upon the new houses would be constructed and gardens sited. The developer has failed to comply with the requirements stipulated by the environmental consultants, LBH Wembley, notably the placement of a geomembrane underneath the stockpile. There are no street scenes, perspectives or sections to show the relationship of the proposed dwellings to the existing homes and features. There is no level information relating to the Western Access Road. B, the perceived relationship of the proposed dwellings to homes already built. The dam and the wider environment is unacceptable. Building 20 dwellings on 4-metre high retained stockpile would result in them being overbearing and out of keeping with the surrounding landscape. C, the absence of a firm proposal for the safe disposal of surplus construction waste from the site is unacceptable. D, the lack of independent monitoring and certification process to ensure compliant delivery of the necessary remediation poses risk to future occupants of the proposed dwellings and potential liability issues for Dorset Council. Number 2, BPC also objects on the ground of prematurely due to the failure of Dorset Council to consult BPC on the drafting of the Section 106 agreement to include provision for a genuine third-party monitoring arrangement that prohibits dependence on self-certification by the developer and or contractor. An example of the risks associated with this process relates to the recent removal of contaminated soil from the gardens of numbers 2, 4 and 6 Factory Hill 2 to 3 years after commencement of occupation by their new owners. B, removal of contaminated waste prior to the commencement of any construction works above floor slab level. C, There are numerous outstanding issues relating to the existing Section 106 which have yet to be resolved. These should be carried forward into the new Section 106 agreement. D. Early completion of the consented works to the extended public open space, including those to form the LAP as shown on the approved landscape plans, and timely payment of increased commuted sum to cover future maintenance costs of the enlarged area. E. Remediation and certification of the extended POS. And number 3, from its experience of the execution of works, including the obvious breaches of the remediation strategy, BPC believes that the performance-related bank bond linked to an all-embracing Section 106 is essential to ensure full compliance with all obligations by the developer. Okay.
Thank you very much indeed, Nicola. We have no submission from the developer, is that right? No, okay, good. Before I move on to members' questions, I think it'd be helpful just to raise a few headline points here that have come up several times and just give officers and indeed including Mark Hitchcock to enforcement the opportunity to come in and clarify a few issues which might clear away a lot of the questions. So can I ask Hannah, first of all, if you could talk a little bit about the design and appearance and the changes to the number of homes and what the implications of that are, and see if we can get some clarity on that. And then could I ask either you, Hannah, or Mark, whichever of you it would most like to do it, to say a few words to the committee just to clarify, just to answer some of the questions that have been raised about the soil heap and the contamination and the remediation, and so not too much history, but just to let us know where we are on those 2 points. And then finally, a little word about the questions that have been raised by Broughton Parish Council on the Section 106. So shall we start with the spoil heap and the contamination? Hannah or Mark, which would you like to address that? Just to answer some of the general questions.
I don't mind answering that, Sherry. So
thank you. Yes.
In terms of the contaminated land and concerns about whether it's been
yes,
properly dealt with across the site,
and the what's being done about the spoil heap as well, which is part of the same story, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. The original consent has a series of full contaminated land conditions that require remediation strategies to be submitted, and then the development has to be carried out with those, and then verification reports have to be submitted for approval. So I'll just show you the layout of the site quickly, the wider site. So in relation to, because it's it's being built out because of the viability issues quite slowly, we've taken a phased approach to each of the areas and zoned them in different ways. So this is we've zoned this zone B in the contaminated land reports, which is the open space area. This area is not open to the public yet, and it hasn't been completely signed off because we need to make sure that the membrane's been put in correctly and the clean layer of topsoil has been included in this area. So it's not got final sign off and it's not being used at the moment. This area here is zone C. So appropriate remediation for this area, which has been constructed and built, was submitted and approved. The membrane was put in all of the gardens. So you've got an impermeable membrane that was put in the gardens here. And then you've got an impermeable membrane inside every dwelling, which safeguards against hydrocarbons. In the garden area, the methodology across the whole site is to have an impermeable membrane and then a clean layer of topsoil. So what happened in this area here was the verification reports and testing for the clean topsoil identified small amounts of contaminated land issues within those garden areas. That's why the topsoil was removed, the membrane was redone and clean topsoil was put in those areas. I understand it obviously caused concern for the people occupying that, but that is the contaminated land conditions controlling that and ensuring that we could, when those samples were provided to us, get the developer to redo those garden areas, and that's what happened there. These properties here and these two here, which are occupied as well, that these have all been verified and are acceptable in terms of the mitigation strategy, with the hydrocarbon membrane inside the house and the impermeable membrane in the garden with the clean topsoil. The reason that the objectors might have seen reports saying that there was no contamination present is that we're asking for verification of the clean topsoil layer. So what we want to see on this clean topsoil, which is imported, it's not from within the site, it's imported in from outside into the site. We want to make sure that is completely free of any contaminants, and it's what the garden areas have in their area. So the only thing I can think of when people are saying that suddenly the reports say there's no contaminated land is it's the verification reports relating to the clean soil capping area within the garden areas. In terms of the spoil heap, ideally this would be taken off the site, but this is a significant amount of money to do that, and the scheme does not have any viability in it, unfortunately, to take it off of the site. So the most important thing is the site is safe for human occupation. So there's no way that these conditions allow anything that would be unacceptable in that respect. The changes in levels result in, if I just show you this photograph, so this is what the new proposal looks like. So the reason that the garden levels are raised, it's not raising the floor level of the dwellings, it's raising the garden level because it's split level. So this area here has a membrane underneath the gardens, clean topsoil level layer on top of the garden area, and the gardens have been made up at the rear. So you walk out of the lounge, rather than walking out against a retaining wall, the soil is being reused at the back here. So it's not being used to raise the levels. So you're not going to have dwellings placed on top of the spoil heap that are an extra 4 meters high. It's going to sit within the street scene like this. You can already see the impact because they've already constructed 3 of them. So I think some of those concerns are potentially not founded in terms of the overall heights of the building. One of the objectors referred to this element here and said it was out of character of the street scene. That's outside of this red line here. So that's not an issue in terms of anything we can look at through this application because it's already been consented. So I think the plan to reuse the soil is only okay with all of the conditions that we've placed on the recommendation, and there has been sort of significant monitoring of the site, which Mark can talk about if you like, in terms of how we've been proactive about going out and looking at the site to make sure that these contaminated land conditions are being adhered to.
Thank you. Mark, would you like to add anything to this? I appreciate that you haven't got a report, but this is, I know, something that you've been very, very hands-on with for.
Certainly. I think it's fair to say that when we've come across anything on the site and when the developer has alerted to us they've reached various stages, what we have been very hot on is consulting with our contamination consultant, WPA. So I've carried out a number of site visits, taken photographs when they're at various stages, including when membranes have been installed, when mitigation works have been put in place, and I've provided that information to the contamination consultant, who has then accepted it. And we don't have any outstanding matters, major outstanding matters of concern on the site at the moment. Okay. There's also been the occasional visit with the contamination consultant. The last one was last month on the 22nd of July, so that she has also had eyes on to see what the developer has been doing on site. Okay.
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much. Good.
Could I just add to that,
yes,
Sherry? Sorry, about there was one point about whether it was independently verified, the reports, and whether we needed. I think the parish council are concerned that we need some other level of verification about the results that the contaminated land consultant for the applicant is submitting. I think Mark's just explained that we employ a specialist contaminated land consultant, the applicant has a specialist contaminated land consultant that has to meet the industry standards on the information they submit to us. It's all passed through WPA. They look at all of that, and they will, if they spot anything that they need further information on, or they need more soil testing or anything like that, more sampling done, go back and ask for information. So we already have 2 specialist consultants looking at the site. If we had another layer where we asked for an independent person to look at it, that would mean employing an additional independent person. So I don't think it would actually add anything to the process, because it is very the amount of scrutiny of the information is at the moment through WPA high anyway, I'd say. Yes. And that's a normal process we go through on
that's very helpful, thank you. Just to clarify, in general terms, the contamination, you mentioned asbestos, we've seen oil heaps, oil drums. Is there anything other than that, particular to this contamination?
The main ones were hydrocarbons, and the asbestos was the major 2 issues. There are traces of other contaminants, because the site has had goodness knows what use on it. Yes. So I can't say that they're the only contaminants, but what I can say is that the whole method is to have barriers between humans using it and the contaminated soil that will remain on the site through this methodology. Yes, and that's gone through, obviously the contaminated land consultant in terms of the precise methodology for the barriers that we put in.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think one of the concerns that was raised was the membrane on the bottom of the spoil heap. Actually, that was from an incident, a spill, an oil spill early on, where specifically an area was. A membrane was put in under part of the spoil heap, if you like, and the oil spill was contaminated soil was placed on top of that membrane. Okay, then other spoil has been added to that, and that was something that the developer did. It wasn't a breach or anything, but it did sort of like compound that problem, and everything that our contamination consultant is aware of that, and that's why the methodology of putting a membrane over the spoil heap or any spoil use, and then, as Hannah has already explained, then clean soil put on top of that for any gardens or anything is an industry accepted method for dealing with the level of contamination that we have.
Okay, thank you. What I'm hearing is a very, very considerable degree of scrutiny of the contamination on the site, which I'm finding quite reassuring. Before I move on from Hannah and go to questions, then the other question that was asked in the responses from the public and the parish council was about the change to the design and the change to the number of the increased number and the smaller size of the houses. Would you just give us a little more detail on that and why you're satisfied with that?
Yeah, okay. So I'll just move on to the elevations, because that shows. So those plots that I was just showing you here are these units here. So plots 22, I think it's 21 to 20, 23, that's right. Is this, Mark will tell me if I'm wrong.
It's 22 to 24. I'll be quiet
24 now. Thank you. No, thanks, Mark. So this unit, this section here is what I was showing the photographs of with the split level unit. You can see down here, this is what we consented before. So it was still over, so we've basically gone from 2.5 to more 3 units. We've lost the sort of dormer windows here. It is slightly different to what we have consented for, but I think it does follow, if you look at some of the other dwellings we've already consented on the site, it follows the theme across the site of what we've already approved. I think if you can tell from in the street scene, it doesn't look too obtrusive. It fits in with that sort of character of the mill. It doesn't impact on anyone else in terms of the design, particularly because you've still got the similar amount of windows in each proposal, and the levels on ground floor stay the same. the applicant sort of added some little windows along here to try and get some surveillance along there, because they did look a little bit blank, but they improved the view of these. And again, it's the same similar alterations you can see on what we consented previously. So they were still fairly tall buildings, even though they were 2.5. They had quite steep pitched roofs. So we're not looking at a massive increase in the scale of the buildings, but you can see instead of having 2 dwellings here, you've got a terrace of 3. So they've managed to get an additional unit in there to help with the sort of viability and what we're selling across the site, and what they've managed to sort of get interest in terms of sales. And you can see again here, this element hasn't changed so considerably from what was previously allowed. So I think overall it is a slight change from the cottage type approach, but it does sort of follow the wider sort of design that has been accepted across the site, because if you see the difference here is marginal to get the extra unit in there. I think the sort of split, the step in the sort of roof planes helps as well break the massing of the building slightly. So overall, the impact is considered to be acceptable in relation to the increase in units. There's no, because they're smaller units, as the highway officer has said, there's no increase in any sort of harm in terms of highway impacts or anything like that. So there's no reason that officers have identified to refuse the proposed design amendments.
I'm sorry, I'm muted. Part of the motivation for, apart from the obvious reason of wanting to have more units, these are smaller units, which is what the market, what was selling is, I think that's what you said. Yes.
As the development's gone on, there's been more demand for the smaller units, is what I've been told by the applicant. So in associate Homes England have been supported the scheme through the loan, and it was decided that applying for additional smaller units would help in terms of the sales. It was what was selling, you're right, across the site, and all of the rest of the site has sold, including these units here, but they haven't been occupied yet, obviously pending the this decision. Okay, and then finally, the Parish Council raised some questions about the section 106. Can we just clarify that? Yes, the heads of terms in this current 106 are the same, as I already said, as the previously consented scheme. So there would still be a dam management contribution. There'd still be a village hall contribution for the additional 4 dwellings. That would be provided. The developers already made the larger village hall contribution in relation to the other scheme, because that was required already, and there'd still be the obligation to lay out the open space and provide an opportunity in the first instance for the parish council to take on that space with a maintenance contribution that would allow them to maintain the space there. So the heads of terms are the same. The additional heads of terms that were suggested in terms of guarantees really would be a duplication of the various conditions that we've got, and I can't see there's any planning reason that we'd be able to justify those additional heads of terms in terms of guarantees and such like, because it's not really a planning mechanism to facilitate that. And I think with the 106, which is enforceable, and the planning conditions which are enforceable, there shouldn't really be any need for anything additional in that respect. That's helpful. Thank you very much. Members, your question. I have Councillor Fry first.
Thank you, Chair. I got 4 questions, please, if I may.
You may.
The first one, we've talked a lot about soil contamination and this and that about it. What is it actually contaminated with, and what is the risk to human life or health with it? Do you want me to take them all, each one all at a time, or shall I wait for their response on the first one?
Let's reply. I think we just covered that when I just asked that, but yes, Hannah, what is it contaminated with, and what's the risk?
There was a lot of asbestos on the site previously, as you can see from those photographs. It was a building that, you know, unfortunately at the time had a lot of asbestos on piping and throughout the whole building. The asbestos, as part of the decontamination of the site, the asbestos was removed from the site. So we're talking about trace elements of asbestos here. We're not talking about the fact that large amounts of asbestos have been retained within the site. That was part of the initial clearing of the site and the demolition of the buildings. With that amount of asbestos, there are within the soil, there is still traces of asbestos in there, and there's no tolerance in terms of human health for contact with asbestos. So that's why we have this methodology of capping the soil, which may have contaminated land within it, including asbestos, and then a clean layer of topsoil, which also has to be tested, and that soil comes from outside the site, and we need the reports from that to say that's clean and that's okay. So that's one of the main things that we've had to mitigate against. The hydrocarbons are obviously from the oil and the other industrial uses, and the danger there is within buildings, so the accumulation over time, and that's why all of the dwellings have to have an impermeable barrier inside them, which stops any hydrocarbons. The gases won't be able to get through into the voids where people are living in, and that will prevent against that. I mean, I can't go through any other specific exact details of other contaminants. There are traces of different contaminants in the soil, but the methodology that's proposed would be sufficient for human health to mitigate against any of the contaminants that have been found. And I think it's worth bearing in mind there's been a lot of soil testing from the previous contaminated land consultant the applicant employed, and from the current one. We've asked for significant testings to characterise the spoil heap, so we understand the level of contamination in there, and also across each zone before it's constructed, multiple soil testing in each of those plots, so we understand. So if there was any pockets of unidentified contamination, this process would pick that up, and the remediation and the verification would have to respond to that.
Thank you.
If it might help, the grade of the membrane that the developer has been using and is proposing to use on the rest of the site is the highest grade you can get, and it actually takes into account all the types of contaminants, and it's there to protect any future occupants from any type of contaminant. Okay.
Is that one-way membrane or two-way?
Yes, it is impermeable. It will not allow things to go through it.
So yeah, I'm looking at there, Mr. Hitchcock. If it stop any substances going up, will it stop substances such as water and rainwater and floodwater going down?
In those parts of the site that they are occupied and they're in place, yes, it would do, but there will be drainage around, because there has to be.
Yeah, yeah. Your next question, Councillor Fry.
Thank you. The one I would question is around the number of vehicles on site. I have no problem with the changes in the number of houses. That's one for the applicant, and that. But I would question and challenge the issue of less cars needed. In my opinion, if you've got a 4-bedroom house, the other 2 bedrooms are likely to be occupied by young people up to the age of 17 or thereabouts. If they're older, they could be driving. But if you take those 2 bedrooms out, then I would say that the most majority of people will either have 1 or 2 cars, so thereby increasing the number of houses, you're likely to increase or at least maintain the number of cars on site. Would you like to comment?
Steve Savage, would you like to tell us about the cars on site, please?
Certainly can. Well, I can't dispute the logic of Councillor Fry's reasoning there. Well, the Highway Authority's got no problem if it's the same number of cars going through the access. I mean, I do remember this site from many years ago. Walking around with other committee members, and one of the main issues was the junction with Factory Hill with the main road, which was resolved in terms of the visibility space and the like. I'm unaware of there being any issues whatsoever with regards to the highways which serve the site, the new works that have been done, and I can't see how the change in house types and a minor increase in numbers like this would have any impact on the highway network whatsoever.
Thanks.
Hopefully that helps.
That does help, but I just don't like the issues on there when we see it documented that there will be less cars on there, because I don't believe there will. Hannah, are there enough car parking spaces for 1 or 2 cars per household?
Again, Steve, I think that's a Steve question. Are there the requisite number of car parking spaces, please, Steve? My
understanding is it's compliant with the council's adopted car parking guidance, Councillor. Thank you very much.
Can you put a number to that, Steve, please?
Not off the top of my head. I could have a look while you discuss other things.
The point is, Councillor Fry, that it wouldn't be grounds for refusal, I think, is what we're being told. If it's compliant, it's compliant. The fact that more might be nice, it's compliant. Steve, you can look that up while Councillor Fry moves to his next question.
Certainly will.
Are there any active or recent enforcement cases on this site other than the soil spoil?
Mark. How long have you got?
Yes, sorry, yes. No, the only other issue is regarding compliance with flooding. Okay, and that is the finishing, primarily down to the finishing off of the open space area, which actually is a flood mitigation area. So the levels have got to be completed there. Now, I admit that I've actually had an email this morning regarding some finishing of works from the developer, but I haven't had that verified. So that's all got to be verified, but that will be part of the conditions. But other than that, and dealing with the spoil heap, no, there is nothing outstanding on the site.
Thank you very much. Very helpful. Thank you very much.
Any further questions, Councillor Fry?
Not for me at the moment. Thank you.
Lovely. Councillor Rideout.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Now, as you members have probably gathered by now, this is it's a both complex and contentious application. And there have been significant concerns raised by the residents and the parish council over the period of development of the site so far with regard to construction management and methodology. We've gone through a lot already, and the main concerns has been to do with identify contaminants, end site levels of houses, the presence or the not of an impermeable membrane under the stockpile, spoil waste disposal and self-certification. Now, we've gone through those. I had lots of questions, and actually quite a lot of them have already been answered. But I think above all, there is a lack of confidence in the works that have gone on site. Understandably, there have been mistakes made where gardens have been dug up. So you can see why there is this issue. And I think we must be certain that existing and potential occupiers of the dwellings are not put at any risk whatsoever to their health or the environment they live in. I said most of my questions have been answered, but Hannah, how can we restore public confidence in the development of this site, and how can we achieve tighter controls on the construction methodology and practices over the rest of the period of development? I have a particular question. I know you've explained how a membrane is going under the new developments, under the house for hydrocarbons, and in the garden for any contamination. But what about the rest of the site that's not covered by dwellings? Is there any risk at all to members of the public and the residents through contaminants coming through the soil? Thank you.
Thank you. Hannah.
Yes, I think the first part was about public confidence in the scheme, and I think when it's matters such as contaminated land, it's completely understandable that the public and the parish council want to be very sure that everything's being carried out appropriately. I think that on this site, it's been an evolving process in terms of the contaminated land, and I agree that not everything has happened in the right order in terms of soil sampling, and that's why we have the issue with Zone C here, and the gardens having to be removed. I think that I can give some confidence that we've gone through this process on these different units that have been constructed, and I think that the developer is very, very aware of exactly what's required to make sure that these plots are going to get signed off. So I think there's a much better understanding across the development of what needs to be done. And in recent times, for the verification of these plots here, we have had the correct process being carried out in terms of all the correct membranes being placed in and the verification reports being sent prior to occupation. So I understand the concern, but I can give, I don't know, I can give some reassurance that the site has proceeded in more recent times in the way that we would want it to in relation to the submission of materials from the developer. What was the second part? Sorry, Councillor.
I asked about the areas that are not covered by dwellings,
sorry,
the public open space. Is there any risk that anything is going to come through?
Well, the public open space does have a membrane within it and a clean topsoil layer, so it's not to the same level that you'd expect in the other developments because it's not habitable. But again, people will not come in contact with contaminated soil in that area if they're playing or using the area. Most of the rest of the site, if it's not inside gardens, is hard surface, so the central access and hard paved areas, so there won't be any issue there. And again, the level of contamination isn't such that these sort of public areas of open space would cause any issues here because people won't be directly using these areas here. So I think that the methodology does take account of all the different uses, and it responds appropriately depending on the use of the site and the intensity of the use and how people will be using it. So I think the answer is no, there won't be any residual risks provided the mitigation's carried out.
Right, thank you. What about the water, the drainage? Where is that? Because presumably the water will be contaminated. Where will that be going?
The drainage was signed off as part of the previous application. So there's a site-wide drainage strategy which drains through the site and then into the drainage basin. So that, I haven't got this precise technical details, but that has been looked at with the Environment Agency in some depth because of the issues, and it has to take account obviously with the fact that there are quite a lot of hard surface permeable areas. So there is actually a condition that's attached to the consent to stop hard standings being formed and gardens being paved, because we do need some permeability through the site. Excuse me, but that has been looked at comprehensively in terms of the drainage specifications for the site.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. Councillor Hall.
Thank you. To carry on with the contamination theory, and I'm sorry if I've missed this, how thick a layer of clean soil is on top of the membrane?
It's 60 centimetres.
So what happens in the future when Mr. and Mrs. new owner decide under permitted development rights to do a single story extension out the back which needs footings that would go through any membrane?
I think Mark may be able to let me know if that's the case, but we have put something on the land registry about the charge on the site, and it is part of the conditions that all permitted development rights are removed, so you can't construct anything without planning permission. So if you wanted to construct a conservatory, or it would be subject to full planning, we would then have to ensure that whatever was constructed mitigates the impacts appropriately. So it may be that additional barriers, depending on how deep the foundations are, would have to be included in the scheme. And that's one of the reasons why you wouldn't normally take all PD rights away from a dwelling, but we have in this case for that reason.
Good. That's helpful.
Yeah, but sorry, if I could come back. Yes. Sorry, there is the assumption there that new owners will always be aware that permitted development rights have been taken away, and it of course somewhat presumes that everybody knows when they can and can't apply for planning application. You know, we all know that things sometimes go underneath the radar, and it just concerns me that we've got an issue here that could potentially be harmful, and I'm just trying to make sure that it's belt and braces. You know, because things do happen and get done, and then we end up with retrospective planning permissions and all sorts.
Mark, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say is we're going as far as we can within the framework that we have to prevent them, and that is primarily the removal of permitted development rights from the site. There is something in the land registry, land charges, which should be picked up as well. Any prospective purchaser or conveyancing solicitor should pick it up. I accept there's the human error side of even a conveyancing solicitor and so forth, but we've done what we can, I think.
And the other question with regards to the membrane, and I'm sorry, I know what I'm trying to say, but I don't know quite what the words are. Water does travel. So what happens in a flood area where you've got contaminants underneath a membrane? You still have the ability for water to travel through. What is being done at the end of the membrane to stop any contaminants from coming out?
I think what you will find is the construction of the culvert. This was actually part of the original LBH, the developer's first contamination consultants methodology, to try and use that word, is the culvert is made of concrete, and the roadway. So if you look at that, the site that we're talking about on this particular application, you have got physical barriers in between, in between the lower end of the site and the upper end of the site, which act as a barrier for contaminants moving. Okay. In addition to that, what I would say is there is a monitoring station on the Stour, about 400 meters further down, and I have been in contact with the environmental agency throughout this process, and they have not alerted me to anything since the development went on of any contaminants getting into the Stour. So it appears that the membranes that have been put in place thus far are doing their job. If there is problems in the future, that should be picked up by the environmental agency.
That's very helpful to know. Just one question with that technology: is that something that is checked by a human at regular intervals, or is it done by Wi-Fi on a regular basis?
I have to be honest, I don't know for certain. The impression that I had from the gentleman at the environmental agency that I've been in touch with is it is actually a station where somebody does go there and check the machines and then take whatever measurements it's made back to the laboratory or whatever samples it's had. Okay,
right.
But that's my understanding.
Yeah,
okay.
You can see my point that if it's an electronic device that sends instant messaging, that is completely different when talking about levels of contamination to something that may only be checked once every 6 months.
Yeah, I honestly don't know for certain how often it's being tested. Okay, I can't answer that question, but that does lie within the remit of the environmental agency.
Exactly. That's okay. Quite right. We are straying now into territory which is not ours to determine here at this planning committee, because that is the responsibility of the Environment Agency, and at some point we have to trust that the Environment Agency know their business in the same way as they have to trust that we as the local planning authority know our business. And I think that's probably, they're good questions, but I think we have to assume that the Environment Agency has got this in hand. Otherwise we'd never be able to say yes to anything, would we?
Yeah, I do understand that, Chair, but you know, when residents etc. have raised issues about the contamination, I think it's important to ask those questions through.
They are, as I say, very, very good questions, and I'm very happy. We'll take as long as we like to probe into this application until members are satisfied. Before I go to the next to Councillor Cook, Steve, you had some car parking info in response to the earlier question.
I do, thank you, Chair. I've done a quick count of what I believe to be the approved layout and the current layout, and they both have 32 spaces or spaces available for parking. What I'd also add is, if you're just looking at the layout in front of us, plots 22, 23, 24, they have drives as well in front of their carport stroke garages. So in answer to Councillor Fry's question, it's the same level of car parking plus a bit more by the looks of the layout. So hopefully that's answered that. Yes. And just as a further aside, I've checked the calculator that we utilise for 4-bed units that they previously had on the site. We'd be looking for 32 spaces. For 10 2-beds and 10 3-beds, we'd look for 20 spaces plus a visitor provision. So whilst there's a logic in saying that these smaller units require more car parking, the empirical data implies that they don't.
Right,
So
okay, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. We'll leave it at that. Councillor Cook, you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, on that block plan that's in front of us at the moment, Hannah, can you point out where this spoil heap is located, please?
Oh, sorry. Sorry, can you see this? Is where my pointer is.
It's actually underneath that house.
Yeah, this isn't constructed yet, so it's in this area here.
Fair enough. And what would be the downside then of picking up on what Councillor Ridout was asking earlier about public confidence? Would it be, yeah, thank you, that's great actually there. Would it be fair or of us to require as condition that that spoil heap was removed specifically to increase public confidence that any contaminated land that isn't being used for gardens, which and mitigated against with the membranes, is actually removed from site? And I can understand the viability aspect from the developer's point of view, but we as a committee are not responsible, or I believe we are not responsible for the financial viability of any site. We are just doing what we believe is in the public best interest. And so for them to, I'm assuming in asking the question, can we condition that that is removed, is that we, on any other building site, if the site is viable, if the calculations that the developer has done before they come to us for planning permission includes making good everything on site that they normally do, in any other situation, if they don't run into any unforeseen circumstances, they would remove that spoil heap because it wouldn't be any financial burden upon them. And for them then, for them possibly to say, we can't do this because it eats into our profit or whatever, is, yeah, with respect to them, neither here nor there for us to consider. What we've got to consider is the best outcome for the public.
Would that it were that simple, Councillor. Actually, viability is a consideration for this committee, of course, because our responsibility is to get houses built, homes built, and viability is key to that. So it's not, it's simply not the case to say that the viability of a site is neither here nor there for us. It is actually sometimes, and this is a case in point, absolutely central to the decision we are making, let's be clear, viability is not quite the same thing as the profit of the developer. We mustn't it's not for us to discuss the profit or otherwise the developer. We're talking about the viability, the financial viability of getting this site built out, and that is absolutely central to our concern. I think the second part of your question is, can we make it a condition that the spoil is removed? I think Hannah will correct me, but I think probably not, because we are required to consider the application before us, and the application before us is designed around the spoil heap not being removed. So I think if we were to say the spoil heap must be removed, that would be a whole different application. And I understand what you're saying, but I don't think it would be possible to condition that, because we've effectively, we're rewriting the application in committee, which is a thing which we would dearly love to do.
That's what I was trying to avoid.
Yes. So alas, I don't. I mean, unless Hannah wants.
I think they're good points to raise, because I understand that it would seem simpler just to remove the whole of the soil heap. I don't think the recommendation would be to grant if we weren't completely confident that that soil could be safely reused. So I think if we got to the point where we consider that with the appropriate mitigation and remediation, it can be safely removed. The chair's point's completely right. How would it then be reasonable to say it has to be removed off the site? I think that's the issue there potentially, because we have got issues of viability, which are a reality of this site, and that's why it's had significant Homes England funding. But that shouldn't detract from the fact that, first and foremost, it has to be safe. The methodology has to be safe. If we were going to condition that it has to be removed, we'd have to rework all of the conditions and the reports which facilitate the safe reuse of the contaminated land within the site, with safety measures to prevent any contamination, causing any concern to human health.
Yes, so the choices before us essentially, members, are either we're looking at this application, not one with the spoil heap removed, and either we're satisfied at the end of our discussion that that we can approve this application, or we're not. And if the only way we would be satisfied is if the spoil heap was removed, then that answers that question. So so your point was well made, Councillor Cook, but it's not something we can condition, because that would be a whole new application. If you see what I mean. Yes. Did you have another question, or you was that it?
No, that was it, Chairman.
I have Councillor Rideout and then Councillor Heatley.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, again, the spoil heap, and I get the viability issues. We got the spoil heap, and the aim is to reuse that with the levelling of the new development. But whilst that construction is going on, what are the reassurances for contamination in the air on the residents and neighbouring properties whilst those works are taking place? Is there any risk to health, and how often will monitoring take place to make sure there is the minimum of risk to residents? Okay.
Good question.
Yes, I think that's a really good question, Councillor. Thank you. The conditions for contaminated land include the approved asbestos materials management plan revision 2. That could have been left to consideration later and conditioned to be submitted to us, but we considered that it was so significant that this spoil heap was treated in the right way through the future development of the additional plots, that it had to be submitted up front. So condition 12 basically ensures that the detailed asbestos management plan, which has been agreed by WPA consultants in association with the applicant's contaminated land consultant, will ensure that all of the measures that are required in relation to working with potential asbestos are carried out. So it will not only safeguard the residents that are living on the site, but also the workers that are working with the spoil heap. And that's a very detailed plan. So we have that in place already. We also have the remediation measures and the material management plan. So basically, with complying with those conditions, will give that sort of comfort that when additional pieces of earth are taken from the spoil heap, it's done in a safe way in accordance with best practice. And that's been something that the contaminated lighting consultants have been very, very keen to ensure, for those reasons that you mentioned, to ensure the health of residents living there and people working on there. There needs to be a watching brief. There has to be someone that's verified actually watching the works to ensure it's carried out appropriately. And we will be making additional visits to the site, myself, Mark, and the contaminated land consultant, to ensure that is the case throughout the development.
Thank you. Yes. Councillor Heatley.
Thank you, Chair. This is really a bit of a development of Councillor Hall's concerns, and I suspect the answer is going to be exactly the same. It's the Environment Agency. We're going to raise it nevertheless. Looking ahead a few years and thinking about climate change, has someone considered the combination of a rapid, deep, fast flood in this area with the overall structure that is being proposed of layers of contaminated soil and membranes and so on and so forth? The two things being brought together to consider the stability of the whole site by somebody.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I think from the outset, flooding has been a key consideration across this site. So I'm just going to show you the risk of flooding is not from groundwater or surface water, it's from fluvial flooding. So this is what we have in place, and it's built to such a standard that it's built, you know, over the lifetime of the development to ensure that if there are flash flooding events where there's, you know, a lot of upstream water coming down from the dam, this culvert is built to take that. You can see how little water there is in there and how it's been engineered. The Environment Agency have obviously taken this, you know, seriously as well, and been involved. And there's also been an engineer that specialises in dams, you know, a panel engineer that's looked at this and approved it. So I know this is I probably not talked enough about drainage on this because it's been dealt with in previous applications, yes. and councillors may not have been you know, familiar with it from back then, but I think that I can reassure you that flooding has been a key consideration. Flash flooding would be dealt with through the infrastructure that's been provided by the developer, and that had to be provided up front so that the dwellings that have been occupied are not at risk of flooding now they're occupied.
If it is helpful, I know that the adjacent landowner, under permit from the Environmental Agency, has been doing some flood mitigation works upriver. So I think that the Environmental Agency are doing flood defences and improvements along the River Stour.
Okay, thank you. I'm reassured.
Good, thank you very much. I have no further questions. If we are ready, we can move on to debate. While you're all thinking about that, I would just comment, it's very interesting, isn't it, how challenging this is for us as a planning authority. And it just indicates what we need to be aware of when we say, as we sometimes rather glibly do, that it would be much better if housing developments were put on brownfield sites, not on our lovely green fields, as we were discussing this morning. When we talk about brownfield sites, this is what we mean, and it's not easy to put housing development on brownfield sites. And you know, there's a lesson in here for us, I think, about the degree of difficulty that is faced by planners and developers with brownfield sites, and this one in particular. And the other consideration here is that if anyone can ever get this site right, it will make lovely homes for people. And I remember the site visit here many years ago, and the potential for making lovely homes for people is here. But my goodness me, it's challenging. So does anyone want to make any comment or any proposal with regard to this? You've asked a lot of really good robust questions, committee. Does anyone want to make a point of discussing it? A proposal, indeed.
Chair, I
Yes.
would like to propose this one. Clearly, as you've made some very good statements there about a brownfield site. It's not perfect, but we need houses. We have to rely on the experts to deal with the contamination and the flooding and that. And actually, it's reassuring to know that in a floodplain, they are taking proper steps to mitigate the flooding there. We do need houses, so I'm happy to propose it. It's not perfect, but it's going to provide housing and accommodation for people that need it.
That's very helpful. Is there anyone who would like to second it?
I'm happy to second it, Chair. Carol Jones.
Thank you. Right, I've had a proposer and a seconder, and you're both proposing as in the report with the conditions as proposed, right? Yes.
Yes, completely.
Yes. Good, absolutely. Well, I'm going to put this to a minded to vote, members, because I think we've had a very good discussion of this, and I think you probably know everything you're going to know now in order to make your mind up. So when you're ready, I will put it now to the minded to vote. When I call your name, will you tell me you're either for or against? Councillor Cook.
For.
Councillor Fry.
For.
Councillor Hall.
A very reluctant for.
Councillor Heatley.
For.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Stella Jones, sorry, I beg your pardon, Carol. Stella Jones. Councillor Mary Penfold. Mary Penfold.
4.
Thank you. I hear you, Mary. Councillor Val Pothecary.
I'm sorry, I'm abstaining.
That's all right. Councillor Belinda Rideout.
Thank you. I'm not completely satisfied, but I'll go with it 4.
Okay, thank you very much. So with one abstention, that's the committee is therefore minded to support this recommendation to grant subject to the conditions and the completion of section 106 agreement. I will now go to Mike Garrity, Head of Planning, to hear your decision. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've listened thoroughly to the full debate that we've just heard, and I can confirm that the decision will be determined in line with the committee's minded to decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That was a long item, but an important one. We have 2 more to go. I'm wondering, members, if you could just indicate to me quickly if any of you feel you would like to have a comfort break now, or if you would like us to press on. I'm happy either way, but I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. And no view either way, whether you'd like to press on. I'm having one call to press on. We will press on then, and we can always break in a minute if we need to. We will now move on then to agenda item 5D. This is a change of use from offices to residential apartments at South Hawks House in Dorchester. No need for a site visit to that. I will just say a brief word about the declaration of interest in case anybody is still listening and is interested in this. Of course, council, this is a building owned by Dorset Council and in previously in use by all councillors. Therefore, as members, we all to an extent have an interest in this application, but we don't have an interest such that would prevent us from making this decision. But if there is any member who feels that they are predetermined on this application, they should say so now. Most of us will not be. I'm not seeing anything. That's excellent. Now, this application is before us, as I say, because it's a site owned by Dorset Council. It's an unusual item, and I hope you were all paying attention when you read your report, in that it's permitted development, and the committee does not usually consider permitted development. So we need to be very clear about what we are and what we're not deciding here. As the planning authority, we are asked to look at 5 very precisely defined matters only, and we can approve or refuse or impose conditions just in relation to those 5 matters. And Hugh Williams will guide us through all this with his report, and then we can hear from Steve Savage afterwards. Hugh, the floor is yours if you will guide the committee through this most interesting application. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. It's
before us. It's
okay.
on the screen. Lovely, thank you.
As you've mentioned, this isn't an application for planning permission, but instead an application that seeks the planning authority's determination on whether prior approval is required in connection with the change of use from B1A office use to dwelling houses as permitted development. Such applications consideration is effectively limited to whether or not the proposed change of use falls within the scope of the changes granted planning permission by the General Permitted Development Order and to the specific subject matter of the application. In this instance, the subject matter of the application concerns the transport and highways impacts of the development, the contamination risks on the site, flooding risks on the site, impacts from noise from commercial premises on the intended occupiers of the development, and the provision of adequate natural light in all of the habitable rooms of the dwelling houses. Very few prior determination applications of this type are reported
for consideration at Dorset Council's planning committees, the intention being that such applications are a light touch process that can be completed quickly and which is deliberately intended to be less onerous than making a planning application. However, the application is, as this application is made by Dorset Council and relates to land in Dorset Council's ownership, it's appropriate the application is presented to committee. Key provisions for considering the scope of development granted planning permission by the General Permitted Development Order, or commonly known as the GPDO, are set out in the order itself. There are various matters that can take office to dwelling house changes of use beyond the scope of the GPDO, and the period for completing such change as permitted development is time limited. But as indicated in the report, I'm satisfied that the proposal does fall within the scope of Class M of Part 3 of the GPDO, and that subject to compliance with the broad provisions of the order, the subject change of use could be undertaken as permitted development. Several of the key considerations arising specifically in relation to Part M of Class M of Part 3 are noted at paragraph 11.2 of the report, with other matters relating to some of the wider implications or limitations within the order set out at paragraph 11.3. Since the report was published, concern has been expressed in third-party correspondence that the application is invalid as the application site denoted by a red-edged line on the submitted site location plan does not extend to the public highway, and that Class O of Part 3 only applies where the existing building and any land within its curtilage falls within Class B1A of the use classes order, and that Class O does not apply to the partial conversion of the building where the building is in mixed use. In my opinion, neither of these concerns invalidate the application. Article 2 of the GPDO makes clear that for the purposes of the order, subject to various exceptions that do not apply in this instance, the term building includes any part of a building. I'm also satisfied that the parts of Southwark's house proposed to be used as dwelling houses in this application were in use for a purpose falling within Class B1A offices on the 29th of May 2013, one of the requirements set out in the GPDO, and that the proposed change does fall within the scope of Class O of Part 3. In relation to the submitted site location plan, the requirement in the GPDO is for a plan indicating the site and showing the proposed development. The application includes a site location plan shown here, as well as existing and proposed floor plans and elevation drawings. I'm content that the plans and drawings are adequate for the purposes of the application. The comment that the application site does not adjoin the public highway is not strictly correct, as the site does in fact adjoin public highway, but I suspect that the particular concern being raised by the respondents is that vehicular access to the building, as many members will appreciate, is through the Old Market car park, situated to the north of Southwark's house, parts of which, in terms of its northern half, are located outside of both the red-edged application site and blue-edged land, indicating land that's in the ownership or control of Dorset Council. The submitted transport statement notes that the existing access from Charles Street via the Old Market car park will be retained, and I'm satisfied that there is no requirement in the GPDO for the application site to contain additional land beyond that shown within this application. The main findings of the transport statement and the consultation response from the Council's Transport Development Liaison Engineer on behalf of the Council's Highway Authority are set out in the report. In short, the transport and highways impacts of the development are considered to be acceptable. In terms of other elements of the site context, the pedestrian route of South Walks is situated to the south of the building, beyond which is South Walks Road. Ackland Road lies to the east of the application site, and there are mixed town centre uses on the western side of Charles Street to the west. The whole of the application site is within the Dorchester Conservation Area. South Walks being constructed along the banks that formed part of the Roman town defences and forming part of the Dorchester Roman Walls scheduled monument, shown on this plan by the red edging, red shading, and also part of the Grade 2 listed Town Walks registered park and garden, shown shaded green. Further designated heritage assets lie to the west, including the Grade 2 star South Lodge and Grade 2 listed 22 South Street. Southwarks House itself is neither listed nor within the curtilage of any listed buildings, and no part of the application site comprises part of a scheduled monument or part of the registered park and garden. To the south of Southwarks Road, there's a mix of residential and commercial uses, with further residential development on the eastern side of Ackland Road. The Environment Agency's flood map for planning shows the application site to be in flood zone 1 and hence at low risk of fluvial flooding. Not located within a critical drainage area, and the proposed dwelling houses are not considered to be at elevated risk of either surface or groundwater flooding, such that I'm content that no further information is necessary in relation to flood risk on the site. No changes are proposed at either ground level or lower ground level at the western end of the building, such that the library and the learning centre are to be retained as they are. But there are some minor changes proposed. There are minor changes envisaged in parts of the ground floor level through the incorporation of 3 commercial units into the existing floor space, albeit that those changes are not actually part of this application. The application relating specifically to the change of use to residential. On ground floor, that comprises a mix of 1 one-bed and 5 two-bed apartments. Externally, there'd be no changes to the western end of the building, but some minor changes with the incorporation of the commercial units and additional doorways at the eastern end, those not being within the scope of the application. Access to the parking at lower ground level would be from the existing access, and again with no change proposed to that arrangement. On the first floor, the existing learning centre would be retained as is, and the remainder of the floor space would be converted to residential, as would the entirety of the second floor. At second floor level, new window openings are proposed to be added for one of the proposed dwellings. These would be accommodated in a position that is not considered to materially impact the external appearance of the building. Returning briefly to the view from Ackland Road, the new windows at second floor level would be positioned just above the glazed porch, aligning with windows either side. At third floor level, the proposal is for the entirety of the existing office space to be converted to a mix of 1, 2 and 3 bed properties, with some adaptations to existing glazing units to create new openings for some of the dwellings. The dwellings on the third floor are a mix of 2 and 3 bed units. Sorry, I think it's previously single bed, but 2 and 3 bed units at third floor. Comparing the existing and the proposed elevations rather highlights the very minor nature of the changes externally, with some additional openings for the commercial units not part of the application. The new opening shown there, the new windows at second floor level, and very minor adjustments to the glazing units at third floor level. All of the proposed dwellings would have adequate natural light, and all would have openings allowing for natural ventilation. All of the proposed dwellings would also exceed the minimum space standards set out in the National Technical Standards for Housing. In relation to contamination risk, ground condition verification reports were provided in relation to the construction of Southwark's house, and it is unlikely that the proposed change of use would involve the breaking of ground, and so is very unlikely to result in the creation of new pathways for any potential contamination. However, a condition is proposed addressing contamination management in the event that unexpected contamination is encountered during the course of the development. So far as noise is concerned, or noise impact from commercial premises, the site's located within a mixed-use area accommodating a range of commercial and residential properties. The commercial uses in the buildings in the near vicinity of the application site are such that they are compatible with the proposed residential use of Southwark's house, such that no further information or mitigation addressing noise impact has been deemed to be necessary. Save for the submission of written statements which have been circulated and are to be read out, and the third-party correspondence referred to earlier in this presentation, the only update to the report relates to the recommendation set out at paragraph 2.1, which currently refers to the Service Manager for Development Management and Enforcement, and which should be corrected to refer to the Head of Planning instead. With that adjustment, the recommendation is that committee resolve that it's minded to grant approval subject to the conditions set out at paragraph 12.1 of the report, and recommends that the Head of Planning determines the application accordingly. Obviously, I'll be happy to answer any questions on the report, but that concludes my presentation.
That's excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Hugh. Clear as ever. Steve, would you like to comment on the transport and highways aspects of this?
Thank you, Sherry. The Council's residential car parking calculator identifies a requirement for 41 allocated spaces for a development of this type and scale. These spaces are provided on the lower ground floor level of the building, access from the car park as Hugh's photos indicated. Visitor parking is available in the Old Market car park immediately adjacent to the site. The existing cycle store, which was utilised by staff, will be retained within the ground floor parking area. The proposed conversion of the office space to a residential use will lead to a material reduction in traffic movements associated with the site. So bearing these points in mind, the Highway Authority considers that the proposal does not present a material harm to the transport network or highway safety, and consequently has no objection.
That's
Thank
very
you.
helpful. Thank you very much indeed, Steve. We have 3 public statements to hear. Nicola, when you're ready, we can hear a member of the public, the Town Council and the applicant.
Okay.
Thank you.
Keith Miller, against the application. I write as someone opposed to the above plan. My view is that the original idea to build a substantive modern council office block plus library on what was originally deemed a car park that enabled those who live in the surrounding country areas to park their vehicles when visiting the town for shopping, etc., was very wrong indeed. Today, this error looks even worse given the rapidly growing population within the region that Dorchester town centre serves. To then abandon this same building so soon after it was built and propose that the building be converted to living accommodation makes the matter even worse. In pre-COVID times, parking in the summer months when the tourists were at their peak was becoming difficult. Now that the worst of the pandemic is over and the UK economy is on the road to recovery, pretty soon we are going to see a real surge in demand for retail activity in Dorchester again. At the moment, it does not seem like it, at the loss of number of shops in the town centre, has had a negative impact on retail activity. Having said this, there are signs of recovery. When looking ahead over the next few years, Dorchester would benefit from some substantive modern retail outlets. And with this in mind, I do think the council need to think about what can be done with the Southwarks House that will help lead to the return of the likes of Marks and Spencer and maybe attract others such as Primark. Also, there needs to be some consideration for additional parking too, as popular larger retail outlets will eventually lead to more vehicles arriving in Dorchester. In summary, I hope the council planners will consider a plan for Southwarks House that will benefit the majority, not just the few. I therefore would prefer Southwarks House to be sold to a developer who can create a building structure that serves residents of the town and the region as a whole. Okay.
Thank you.
Statement from Dorset Council. We welcome the application in principle as long as the building can be made suitable for use by the future residents with regard in...
Just Dorchester Town Council, is this?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
Sorry, did I
You
sorry.
did. It's easily done. This is statement from Dorchester Town Council.
Oh, sorry.
Carry on. It's all right.
Okay. We welcome the application in principle as long as the building can be made suitable for use by the future residents with regard in particular to ventilation, living space and access to outdoor recreation. We trust that the existing energy saving measures in and on the building will continue to be fully utilised for the benefit of future residents. We expect the application to be subject to existing local plan policy HOUS 1 to provide at least 35% affordable housing and minimum of 15 units. Okay. And then written statement from Chris Geddes of Albion Planning, the applicant's agent, and they're in support. The proposal falls within the scope of permitted development as defined in Part 3, Class O of Schedule 2 of the GPDO. The development under Part 3 Class O is permitted on condition that the developer must apply for a determination as to whether prior approval of the authority will be required in respect of a number of very limited matters. In this regard, it has been demonstrated that transport and highway impacts, the proposal does not present a material harm to the transport network or highway safety. Reflecting this, your transport development and liaison engineer has not raised any objection, subject to the imposition of a condition requiring the parking spaces, access ways and service areas to be maintained for purposes indicated. Contamination risks. A detailed remediation scheme was implemented when Southwarks House was constructed. As a result, any residual risks can be adequately addressed by the imposition of a condition addressing the management of any unexpected contamination encountered in the unlikely event that any groundbreaking is required. Flooding risks. The site is located within flood zone 1, low risk. It is not within a critical drainage area and is not considered to be at elevated risk of either surface or groundwater flooding. As a result, the proposal would not result in a material increase in flood risk. Impacts of noise from commercial premises on the intended occupiers. The site is located within a mixed-use area accommodating a range of commercial and residential properties. The commercial uses accommodated in the nearby buildings are such that they are compatible with the proposed residential use, and mitigation is not deemed necessary. The provision of adequate natural light in all habitable rooms. The submitted floor plans demonstrate that all of the proposed habitable rooms would receive adequate levels of natural light. Whilst limited external alterations will be required to a number of the proposed apartments, they would not materially affect the external appearance of the buildings, and as a result, they would not compromise development. In addition to the above, all of the proposed apartments would comply with the nationally described space standards. As a result of the above, your officers have concluded that no further information is required to secure a satisfactory level of compliance with the provisions of national planning policy, and that as such, approval should be granted subject to conditions. I would therefore urge the committee to accept the recommendation as set out in the officers' report. This will allow the change of use to proceed and make valuable contribution to your council's 5-year housing land supply, which is currently in deficit. Okay, that's it.
That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Nicola.
Okay.
Before we move on to questions, Hugh, you might have covered it. Can you just touch on the question of the 35% affordable and being policy compliant?
As the development is permitted development,
yeah,
it is not subject to the requirement for 35% affordable housing, and provision of affordable housing is not one of the issues that falls within the scope of the application. That doesn't automatically mean that the units will not be delivered as affordable housing, but it's not something that we're able to control through the determination of this application.
Thank you. That's very helpful, because I suspect that was a number of people were coming up with that question. So the matter of affordable housing is not within our remit to discuss today, precisely because this is not a planning application. It's a change of use determination. Councillor Carol Jones, is this a comment or a question?
It was a question. It was actually related to the affordability. Then in which case will the developer have to come back to us with a firm planning application whereby we can look at affordability or not then?
No, because this is permitted development, so it would not normally be before the committee at all. It's only before the committee because it's owned by Dorset Council. Permitted development is, as Hugh said, it's about a light touch, and okay, that's that government calls it light touch. We call it something entirely different. Hugh, that's right. So it doesn't come back to us at all. No, sorry. Yes, Councillor Stella Jones.
Yeah, so following on from that, this is the only time we've got a chance to talk about Southwarks House. I've got many concerns about turning this specially built modern office into housing. It's not going to be easy to change. It's going to be expensive to change. And if we go 6, adequate natural light in all habitable rooms, it goes on to say it should be high quality, beautiful and sustainable, provide safe, inclusive, accessible and promote health and well-being with a high standard of amenity for existing and future uses. Now, if we look at the building, the high quality of amenity, there are no, we're going to have families living here if it's 3 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. There are no amenities whatsoever for families, for children. There's no outside area. There's nowhere to put their hand washing. There's nowhere to store things like pushchairs, disability buggies, and anything unusual. There's such a lot of things missing from making this a high standard with amenable for all uses. And I'm very concerned. If we look at buildings elsewhere in Dorchester, say in Brewery Square, they actually have gardens, communal gardens. They also have balconies with fresh air. There's nothing in this proposal where people will be able to get outside their little tiny flat.
Can I interrupt you a minute, Stella?
Yes, I know.
You're going to hate what I'm going to say.
You're going to say I'm talking about the wrong thing. I know.
I'm going to say that this is a permitted development,
yeah,
and it's not a planning application. And we are asked to consider only, perhaps Hugh can flick them back on the screen for us. We are only at liberty to consider the precise 5 points as to whether or not we and in that context we can only refuse or ask for more information. And sorry, Hugh, could you go back to the slide that has the points that are before us today, rather than, I understand what you're saying, Stella, and I look at those the scheme for those flats with the same thinking heart, but it's permitted development, and I'm afraid that's how permitted development works. I'm waiting while Hugh finds and reminds us, because it is my job to keep us focused on the things that we are here to discuss and not on a number of things. Hugh, you're looking very confused into the screen there. Have you lost it?
I think it's just restarted, I think, but
good. Yes, because
can I just say that on page 136, under adequate natural light in all habitable rooms, it says the paragraph 126 of the NPPF, and then that goes on to making it amenity. The whole lot that I spoke about is on that actual paragraph.
Right. Chair, are the matters now displaying? Is that?
No, they're not. If you could keep trying, because I think it would be helpful to have it. This is an unusual application for this committee, because I'm just talking while Hugh gets his. There we are. Yeah. This is the point. What we have is 5 precise points of prior approval, and we are asked to establish whether or not we are whether or not we need this planning permission needs. This development needs prior approval on these matters, and it's before us because it's owned by Dorset Council, and that's the limit of what we can determine, not a permitted development. Permitted development is by definition permitted. It's a hard thing to hear, but I'm afraid that's it. Hugh, do you want to come in and just remind us of what we can and cannot decide here?
Well, I think you've sort of summed it up very well, Chair. The approach to the application is sort of summarised at paragraph 10.1, and the committee are expected to take account of any representations made to them as a result of the consultation and publicity undertaken on the application, and to have regard to the National Planning Policy Framework so far as relevant to the subject matter of the planning approval, as if the application were a planning application. So the references to the NPPF in the committee report are to be read in the context of the 5 matters that are within the scope of the application. One of those matters is adequate natural light in all habitable rooms. All of the dwellings, all of the habitable rooms will have adequate natural light, and yeah, I'm content that we've got adequate information to come to that conclusion. And then the other matters relate to the contamination risk on site, which again, for the reasons already covered, I don't believe we need further information before concluding that conditional approval is appropriate.
Can I come back then that I'm not going to go on any further about it, but I was talking about the paragraph on adequate natural light 1123. But can I now ask some questions?
Yes, please do. I didn't mean to
no, I know
stop you, but we have a specific task to do here, and I need to keep us focused on that. Please ask your questions.
But the question then about the commercial units, which you say are outside this application, but are part of the building. They are at the front of the building, and they are just presumably they are going to be given a separate planning application at some time.
The proposed uses for suggested for the commercial units, that part of the building can be changed to those proposed uses under a separate class of permitted development, which doesn't require prior notification or prior approval from the planning authority. So those changes can take place, change of use of those units can take place without referral to the committee. If in conjunction with those changes or subsequent to the change, alterations are sought that would materially impact the external appearance of the building, then that element might come back as a planning application or an application for planning permission, but that's not proposed currently.
Well, thank you. I certainly hope it would come back, because this is a very important site in Dorchester, and you would see those commercial units from the walks, which are so important to Dorchester. Now, can I ask another question?
Yes, please.
Are there going to be any conditions about the trees and landscaping? At the moment, we've got the trees at the northern side, and hopefully they will all be retained. But more importantly, the trees in the walks, I hope there will be conditions that will be nothing done that would damage any of those trees whatsoever, because when you look at the top of the building, some of those flats are going to be looking right at the crown of the trees, and they are big trees. In the spring they're full of very noisy rooks, and I would expect some of the residents say, please can we chop down some of these trees. Hopefully that would not be allowed.
I'll let you answer this, but again, I'm afraid my answer is going to be the same, that we can only apply conditions that relate specifically to the 5 points on the screen.
Yeah, that's fine.
This is what we're being asked to consider, not a wider planning application. Hugh, is there anything we can do about these trees?
A condition of development under the general permitted development order is that it must be carried out in accordance with the details presented. The details presented do not indicate any removal of trees. The entirety of the application site and the immediately surrounding areas are all within the Dorchester Conservation Area.
Yes, yes.
So tree removal within the conservation area is subject to standard conservation control. We cannot put a condition on relating to matters that are outside the 5 points currently on the slide. So I don't think we can impose a condition on landscape maintenance beyond that which requires the scheme to be in accordance with the plans before you. But nor do I believe it's necessary to secure the retention of trees within the conservation area.
In point of fact, Stella, that if this were a planning application, which is not, and we were putting conditions in, that they wouldn't be any firmer than the conditions we've already got, in the sense that it's a conservation area, so they're automatically TPO'd. So it's a good point, but you comforted me a bit on that one. Your next point.
Well, now I've said I'd like to carry on saying a lot, but I'm obviously not going to do. I'm not allowed to. But I say before I finish that I am appalled, absolutely appalled, that this building might be turned into housing with no affordable housing whatsoever, when Dorchester needs affordable housing.
You can definitely say that, and it will have been minuted. Yes, thank you. And anything else, Stella?
Yes. Can we please have a look again at other uses for the building?
That's not for this committee.
Oh, no, it's not. No.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm really sorry. I'm not. I am trying to stay focused on the planning aspects, and I know that there are a lot of other peripheral matters that members would like to have their say on, but this is really not the place.
No, I understand, but I don't think there will be a place, will there? So
well, that's a conversation for another time and another place, and I have some sympathy with that. Councillor Rideout. I can't hear you, Councillor Rideout. You might be muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, excellent. Thank you.
Oh, right. Sorry, I don't know. It didn't say I was muted.
What was going on? No.
Gremlin. Yep. My question is with relevance to bullet point 4, impacts of noise from commercial premises. And I read through the report. But this is impact of noise from commercial premises, I take it, around the application site. My question is, what about the impact of commercial premises? And I've just learnt that there's commercial units going to be on the ground floor, and also the units above where there's going to be a cafe and restaurant. Has there any possible impacts from noise, pollution, etc.? Has that been looked into with this application?
Thank you.
The main issue I would say is from existing commercial premises, but the impact, the indicated intention for commercial use to be accommodated within, or new commercial uses to be accommodated within Southwark's house, is material. At the moment, the floor space that is indicated as being future commercial units is Class B1A offices. Class B1A office is by definition acceptable in a residential area.
Mm-hmm.
So if the use does not change, it doesn't present a significant noise impact. The indication in the application is that the units would utilise permitted development allowances to change from B1A to the new Class E commercial business and service units, which can include uses such as cafe, restaurant, gymnasium, shop, clinic, health centre, creche, day nursery and day centre. So some of those units could potentially give rise to a level of noise that may attract complaint from future occupiers of the building, but are in the main, or in fact in the entirety, I would say, uses that you would not normally prevent from taking place within a residential area. So that is not to say that there will not be any disturbance. If there's a day nursery, there will inevitably be a degree of coming and going and a degree of activity and noise, but not a level of noise that would be unusual in the context of a building containing a mix of uses, including residential use. The units themselves will be constructed, the residential properties will be constructed having regard to the building regulations. So the conversion of the building will include changes that will improve or will incorporate sound insulation measures for the adjacent units. So it doesn't, whilst it's relevant, I don't believe we need more information at this stage in order to conclude that it will be acceptable.
Can I press you a bit on that? I'm looking at our point number 4, and I appreciate that that's primarily commercial premises out with this building. Is there any possibility that we could condition on the back of your point number 4 something about the uses of these commercial buildings? I'm thinking in terms of the operating hours, because there's a world of difference between putting a coffee shop that opens at 8 o'clock in the morning and closes at 7 o'clock in the evening than a wine bar that stays open till 11:30 or 12 o'clock for the residents who are right next door. Is there anything we can do in terms of I mean, I'm trying not to stray too far outside of our remit here, but it would be really helpful if we could put some constraining hand on those commercial units.
I think I'd be nervous about a condition relating to hours of use of the commercial units that are not part of this application. But it means that perhaps would achieve very much the same ends, would be a condition requiring the submission and approval of of measures for the mitigation of noise from nearby commercial premises, under which the developer could submit details of sound attenuation measures within the apartments, and if the intention, if the landowner was so minded to impose restrictions on uses elsewhere within the buildings and the timings of those uses, they could be approved within the context of that form of scheme. But you know, I would come back to the point that I don't think it's unusual to have residential properties above a restaurant in a town centre environment. No,
you're right. You're right. I mean, I'll see what other committee members think, but if that's all that we've got, I would be quite in favour of adding that condition. It just gives us a tiny little extra control over this, but I appreciate it. It doesn't amount to much. Councillor Fry, as the ward member, please come in now and have your say.
Thank you, Chair. I'm aware of the contentious issues behind the building of Southwark's House, and this decision is no less contentious. It is disappointing that we have to make this decision before us this afternoon. I can think that more other uses are more suitable for this building and hope that these can be explored fully and totally in order to gain public support. I would like to see that Dorset Council does maximise the value on behalf of all the taxpayers of Dorset, possibly by targeting key workers, because obviously with public services in Dorchester, the hospital, the police, the fire, the council, maybe we can target some of those. It's a shame, but I think our hands are tied. Incidentally, what would happen if we all abstained from the vote?
I don't know, but we're not going to do that because we're here to make a decision, and we have to make a decision one way or another. So I don't approve of mass abstentions. That's dereliction of duty, councillor. But I see you're smiling there. Yes. So
I think a lot of what I was going to say has been said. I'm particularly concerned about the light there. With the heating system there, you've got it effectively at the moment an air-conditioned sealed building, which you're going to add a few windows in, which is going to lose and spoil the environmentally friendly green credentials of the building. In fact, it's going to wreck it. Far from ideal. That is not designed as a residential building. It's designed as an office block. It would make an ideal hotel, big retail unit or otherwise, but this is disappointing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Absolutely. Councillor Cook.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Could I ask that we have that the floor plan showing the layout of the residential units again, please, because I'm coming to the conclusion that all habitable. Thank you. Is there any way that that can be expanded? Because I can't actually see the board or not. Sorry to be a
I'm
pain.
not sure that I can within the slide.
That's it.
Is that working?
Yes.
Yeah. All
Is
habitable rooms having adequate natural light. If you look at the inner rooms of some of those, are those considered habitable rooms, or are they bathrooms and or hallways?
The arrangement on each floor essentially is that there's a central hallway providing access to apartments on either side. There are no entirely internal habitable rooms. That wouldn't, obviously a bathroom isn't a habitable room, so there are internal bathrooms, but there are windows through the southern elevation and through the northern elevation of the building for all of the habitable rooms, so that the sitting rooms, the bedrooms, combined living and kitchen areas.
Lovely. So there isn't. Yeah, it does satisfy that adequate natural light. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, good. Okay, thank you. I have no further questions. I'm wondering if there's anybody else who has any other points they want to make. Otherwise, I'm calling for someone who would like to make a proposal. Somebody needs to make.
Sherry, I'm very happy to make a proposal, as reluctant as I am, because I love that office building. I hate going into County Hall, I've got to be honest, but it's permitted development. You can't refuse it, so I will propose it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. And are you proposing it with the additional condition that I have asked for, the approval of mitigation of noise from nearby commercial premises?
If you've proposed it, Sherry, I'm happy to make sure it goes in. Thank you.
I didn't express that very well, but thank you very much. Hugh knows what it was because he read it out. So with that extra condition, so that's with 3 conditions now. Can I have a seconder for that?
I'm happy to second, Sherry. It's Belinda.
Thanks, Belinda. Right.
With the condition. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. So that's Councillor Carol Jones and Councillor Melinda Rideout have proposed and seconded. If I can find my list, I'm going to now put this to the vote, and through gritted teeth, members, I'm going to ask you to vote on this application. When I call your name, tell me your view. Councillor Cook.
Reluctantly for, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Fry.
Even more reluctantly for.
Councillor Hall.
Even more reluctantly for.
No, that's enough. Your point's made. Councillor Heatley.
Just for.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
For.
Sorry, that's Carol Jones. Councillor Stella Jones.
Against.
Against. Councillor Mary Penfold.
For.
Councillor Val Apothecary.
For.
Councillor Belinda Rideout.
For.
That's that is then minded to recommendation is then passed with notable refusal from Councillor Stella Jones, who I know feels very strongly about this. We will now turn to Mike Garrity, Head of Planning, who will give us his decision. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've listened to the debate and confirmed that the application will be determined in line with the committee's minded to decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Goodness me. There we are. I'm looking for my next application. Committee members, we have now been going for 2 hours and a bit. Would you like another brief break?
Yeah.
We have just one.
Sorry?
I'd
appreciate 1 5-minute break if possible.
No, one request for a 5-minute. We will have a 10-minute break. It's and we will reconvene at 4:30. I'm sorry, but if people need a break, we must have a break. I know it's been a long afternoon. We will reconvene at 4:30. Thank you very much indeed. Remember that we stay live in the meantime. I'll see you all in 10 minutes time. Thank you. Good, right, well, welcome back everybody after that short break, and thank you very much indeed for your stamina. We're on the home stretch now and the finishing post is in sight, so we'll just do our last application of the day. Could we just please record apologies from Councillor Tim Cook, who's not able to be with us for the remainder of this meeting, so if we could note his apologies, please. We're now moving on to agenda item 5E, at 17 All Saints Road, Dorchester, an application to remove a garden wall and create a parking space in the front garden. This application is before us in the interest of transparency because the applicant works for Dorset Council. So Hannah Smith, would you like to introduce your report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Can you see that okay?
I can, yes,
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the application is to replace the existing garden wall and form a parking space, an off-road parking space to serve the dwelling house. Just give you some background in terms of the site's location. Just put my pointer on, bear with me. So the application site is located where this red marker is here on the north side of All Saints Road. The site's located within the Dorchester Conservation Area, and it's also subject to the recently made Article 4 directive, which took away PD rights to remove walls fronting roads and highways within the conservation area. Within Dorchester, the enclosures are often key to the character of the street scene in the important conservation area in the centre of Dorchester. So this is an important planning tool to be able to ensure that where there would be harm for the removal of such sort of enclosures, that there is that protection there. In this current situation, it's a relatively modern dwelling house which fronts with a front garden and good sized rear garden onto the road in front here. You can see the application site outlined in red. This is the existing site situation. There's a pedestrian access at present with concrete paths and some shrubs which are planted, but no parking space at present here. So in terms of the proposed parking, off-street parking, some of the enclosure on the wall frontage would be removed, but there would be some wall retained with some attractive piers and also a gate proposed along there. So whilst there is some removal of enclosure along there, there would still be some wall retained along here, and also some good planting of a tree and the retention of some of the shrubs to soften the impact of the proposals. This is a street scene elevation. You can see that there be brick piers and brick walling along here, infilled with railings, which is quite attractive for a domestic property. And then there would be gates located at the entrance of the parking space, and a condition that the gates have to obviously open inwards into the site. Okay. There's a cross section through the site. You can see that there's a slight drop in levels, but there's no highway objection to the proposal at all. To show you some photographs of the existing wall frontage here, so it's quite a low modern wall that would be removed. This section here would be removed to form parking space, and there'd be retention of a wall along here with some railings above to still have some sense of enclosure. This is a street view of the site looking down the road, and you can see there's also already been some entrances on quite a few of the properties formed. So there isn't a strong character along here of continuous walls. There's another view along here. You can see that parking spaces have been formed, but there's still a fairly verdant feel to the street because vegetation has been retained where possible between the parking spaces. So it's considered that whilst this would result in the loss of some wall, there wouldn't be any harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area, which is one of the main key considerations in this case. So just to go through the planning issues, the highway considerations, gates would not open onto the highway, and an informative is proposed on the proposed recommended conditions. So to summarise, there's no highway safety issue involved, and officers are satisfied that the proposal would not give rise to any harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area, and the application is recommended to grant subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Very, very helpful. Thank you very much indeed. Steve, do you have anything you would like to add from highways, please?
Well, the pertinent point, as Hannah's mentioned, is the gates, yeah. Chair.
Yes.
When a car's parked in there, then I'm not sure how they're going to be able to shut the gates. So I guess they're only ever going to be shut when the car's long gone. And we can't obviously have them opening over the adjacent footway or the highway because that causes an issue. But if there's a condition on and it can be adhered to, then not a problem, as far as we're concerned.
Yeah,
thank you.
Good, thank you. Yes, I know one or two properties where actually the gates only close when the car's not in it. The gates are more there for show, but so that's not uncommon, but quite obviously your point is made about not opening over the pavement. We have no public statements, so I will move straight to questions. Councillor Stella Jones, was that a question about this application from some minutes ago?
It's not a question, it's a proposal that we approve this.
Can I take questions first, please?
Oh, sorry,
we take questions first, and then I'll come back to you. Thank you very much. Councillor Apothecary, you had a question.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just to check that there would be a dropped curb there by the entrance for ease in and out.
Yes, drop curb there for ease of in and out.
Yes, as you can see, Hannah's just highlighting the informative, but the informative requires the applicant to contact Dorset Highways under the Highways Act to get the dropped curb and crossing put in, but it's outside of the planning system, as it were.
That's
Sorry,
fine. Okay.
I didn't actually understand what the informative note meant.
I see.
Exactly. Yes. Now we've turned it into language we understand. That's very helpfully cleared up. Right. Any other questions? No. In which case, I will go back to Councillor Stella Jones, who would like to make a proposal.
Yeah, I'm the local ward member. I'm also the person who pushed for the Article 4 direction in Dorchester conservation areas. But in this case, this wall is not worth preserving, and I think I'd like to move approval.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. Councillor Fry, you'd like to second this?
Yes, very happy to second this application on all the facts that have been given so far. Thank you.
That's excellent. Thank you. I have a proposer and a seconder to approve this application as presented, which I'm now going to put to the vote. Tim Cook's not with. Councillor Fry.
4.
Councillor Hall.
4.
Councillor Heatley.
4.
Councillor Jones. Carol Jones. Councillor Stella Jones. Councillor Mary Penfold.
4.
Councillor Val Apothecary. 4. Councillor Belinda Rideout.
4.
That's excellent. Thank you. That's job done. Right. We covered agenda item 6 earlier in the day. Thank goodness for that.
Chairman, sorry,
Chair.
You need to still go to.
Oh, of course I do. I'm sorry. It's been a long day. That was our minded to decision. I will now go to the head of planning, Mike Garrity, to tell us his decision. Mike, I apologise.
No, that's okay. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, that's no problem. And I can confirm the application will be determined in line with the committee's minded to decision. Thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Right. So we have no exempt business. So it only remains to me to thank you all for what has turned out to be something of a marathon for members and indeed for the officers, because it doesn't hurt to be reminded every now and then that we have a long day of committee, but they have hours and hours of work behind the scenes preparing for our long committee. So thank you all very much indeed for the work you've put in today. And I will now bring the meeting to a close, not a minute before time, at 16:40. And thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.